Hey guys, so long story short, my computer cannot process videos. It does not have the power for me to record and edit a video, so I'm just gonna do it straight up this way and we'll see what happens. So we're gonna do the first one today. It'll be the second in my series, Legal Animal Abuse. So today we're going to be going over the Code of Practice, the National Farm Animal Care Council, otherwise known as NFAC. It's their code of practice for the care and handling of hatching eggs, breeders, chickens, and turkeys. So if you want to follow along at all, you basically just Google NFACC Code of Practice chickens. It should be the first one to come up. It's gonna look something like that. So first of all, I just wanted to talk about chickens a little bit and birds in general. So when you think about a bird of any kind, the first thing that you probably think of is birds flying in the air, birds being outside. Typically the thought of a bird in a cage or enclosed in any way is a pretty sad thought. It's pretty crazy that we basically do this to bird species. Like, we've picked a couple different types of birds to do this to on such a mass scale. So we enclose them all together. We put them in completely unnatural situations that they would never be in otherwise. Chickens actually came from Southeast Asia. That's where they originated from. If you've been anywhere hot, like in Hawaii, there are wild chickens everywhere. They're always in pairs with like a rooster and a hen. When I was in Bali in Indonesia, there's wild chickens everywhere. So chickens like the heat, they like being outside, they obviously like their freedom, like any other living being. And so it's just really sad if you think about it, because chickens really don't get any of the respect that they really deserve. I mean, I'm speaking being here in Canada, so we have them locked in all these sheds, locked in crates in the freezing cold when they're originally from warm places. So just the way that we farm them and the way that we treat them, bottom line, is not just. And it's just really sad to think about. If you've ever hung out with a chicken or any birds, turkeys, they're very curious, they're very smart, they're always looking around. Turkeys are very affectionate. Many turkeys, can't speak for them all, of course, but the ones I've met have all been very friendly with humans. I met one recently at a sanctuary in Hawaii, and he like loves hugs. He kept following me around everywhere and puffing up and trying to get me to give him a hug. So just bear all that in mind when we're talking about the code of practice for the handling of these animals, okay? So we're gonna start, first of all, we'll go over some definitions here. So on page 8, we've got the definition for toe treatment. I just wanted to get this one out there right away. So toe treatment, a process that physically alters toes on birds, and that includes toenail clipping and toe trimming. So when you think of treatment, like, oh, I'm going to get a skin treatment, or I'm going to go get a nail treatment, I'm gonna go get a manicure, does that sound like the removal of a nail or like the removal of a full toe? Like, that's kind of a ridiculous name for this type of procedure that they perform. So toe treatment, we'll just keep that one in mind as we go through this. And then page 7, pretty basic terms that are good to know whenever you're speaking to people about birds. So free range, you hear these buzzwords all the time: free range, free run. So what is the difference? So free range, a system where birds are allowed access to an outdoor area when weather permits. So the birds have access to the outside for at least a few minutes a day, so they say, weather permitting. As we know, it gets quite cold here in Canada. I'm in BC, and even then we can get to -30 sometimes. very cold, so how often are they going outside? Free run, a system where birds roam freely inside a barn but do not have outdoor access. So free run also means that they're not in the little battery cages. That being said, they're roaming freely inside a barn, but they can be packed into those barns by like the hundreds. So not usually a very nice atmosphere in there, very dusty, very dark, very smelly, lots of ammonia. So I just wanted to go over those two. Where are we going next? So page 12. So these things that I'm talking about are standard procedures, and in my mind, they sound abusive. They don't sound like something you would like done to you or your family members. They don't sound humane, but these are the legal ways to do things here. So 2.5, so physical alterations and bird identification. So part of the processing of chicks and poults at hatcheries can involve physical alterations that are intended to protect their welfare in the long term, even though the procedures themselves may cause pain in the short term. Such physical alterations fall into one of two categories: the removal of part of the anatomy that is likely to be injured, so a snood, a turkey snood, or a comb, or is likely to cause injury to other birds, toes, beaks, spurs. So they'll remove things like the snood, they'll remove things like the comb to protect the chicken because other chickens might come at them and injure those areas, and they'll remove other parts of the bird, toes and beaks, to stop them from injuring other animals. So again, this goes back to the fact that if they weren't all shoved into a little barn in a small space very unnaturally, they wouldn't be injuring each other, right? If they were free and able to do whatever they want and not packed into small spaces, we wouldn't have to do this in the first place. So yeah. And with NFAC, National Farm Animal Care Council, my sister has spoken to people that work there, and basically like they get the job with the understanding that this is what it is, animals are used for food, and that's it. It's not really for the welfare or how to make this better or how to not eat animals, of course. It's animals are food, so this is how we do it, and that's just it. If you don't have that mindset, like there's no way you're getting the job. So it's very sad because these animals are just at the mercy of these people that already have it made up in their minds that animals are food and that is it. And yeah, they have nobody kind of in their corner. They're obviously advocating for them. So we're next going to go to page 13. There's a chart here. Okay, so this goes over the alterations. So possible physical alterations performed on day-old chicks or poults and hatcheries. So day-old, they just hatched. Beak treatment, all birds except for broiler chickens. So they're either using infrared treatment or hot blade trimming. Not nice. Toe treatment, so like we talked about originally, this is done on turkeys, broiler breeder roosters, and turkey breeders. So microwave treatment or hot blade trimming to literally take their toes off or take their nails off. Awful. Spur or dew claw removal. So turkeys, turkey breeder hens, and broiler breeder roosters. This is done with a microwave treatment or scissors. That doesn't sound very nice. Like you wouldn't take your dog in to get their dew claws removed, and the vet's just like, pulls out their scissors and does that on the first day the puppy's born without any euthanasia. It's not a thing. We wouldn't do that to our pets. But somehow it's humane to do on farmed animals. Comb removal, so little chicks, their combs. So this is done actually on broiler breeder roosters. So the first day that the breeder roosters are born, they cut off their combs with scissors, it says, is their method. Snood removal, so the little thing that hangs over a turkey's beak. It's funny because you don't see it on farmed, like if you see pictures of farmed turkeys, they don't have those. But if you see a turkey on a sanctuary, or in the wild, they have these like pieces of skin that hang over their beaks. You can honestly almost not see their beaks sometimes. So this is done on turkeys, and turkeys that are used for breeding manually. So I'm assuming that means scissors, it doesn't say, or tweezers. So they just rip them off. Doesn't seem very nice at all. So then we're gonna go to page 17. Talk about air ventilation and quality. So ventilation plays a key role in maintaining a comfortable and healthy environment for birds. Air quality is a complex issue, interacting with a number of important factors such as bird size and age, stocking density, temperature and relative humidity, dust and ammonia levels. Ammonia is an irritant. Domestic fowl are able to detect it at 5 parts per million, and concentrations greater than 25 parts per million can cause short-term damage to respiratory systems and feet, and can lead to corneal ulcerations, which are basically burns on your eye. I'm just talking about this because if you've ever had, I guess, a pet, like even a hamster or whatever, and they have their like bedding and stuff, it's like really quick for it to get contaminated with urine, and it's so strong. And every single truck I've ever seen come in with broiler chickens, so not egg-laying hens. Broiler chickens are the chickens that we eat for their flesh. I've never seen a truck come in where these birds don't have ammonia burns on their breasts, on their stomachs, sometimes even on their necks, because they're constantly just in ammonia-filled environments. And yeah, it's supposed to be looked over all the time, but I mean, at the end of the day, if it's more expensive to replace the bedding more often, more expensive to replace the material they're walking on, our farmer's going to do it. Doesn't really matter. Is it really that well like looked over? Like, is anybody checking this? Like, it definitely doesn't seem like it from my experiences of stopping many a slaughter truck on the way to the slaughterhouse. These birds are all burnt. It's awful to see. So let's go now to page 30. So again, these codes of practice are available online. Anybody can just pull them up and look at them. They're recommendations by NFAC. So I mean, like, this is the best way to do things. This is the way they recommend people do things. But again, how often is it enforced? And they're just recommendations, right? So, okay. Page 30. So here it says, in the yellow, it says requirements. Flock inspections must be conducted at least daily, and that mortalities and culls must be recorded daily. So dead birds must be removed and disposed of daily. So if you guys have ever been in a broiler breeder barn, or just a broiler barn, or if you've seen videos of people going into these places, what do you see most often when you're watching these videos? You see dead birds laying kind of on their back splayed. They grow at such a fast rate that if they can't hold themselves up, they fall over so easily. When they fall over, they can't get back up, so they get trampled or they starve to death. And I mean, to be seeing these types of dead birds living amongst the living in every single video you see, and all these pictures, are they going in every day, checking on them, removing them? I mean, are these birds sitting with dead ones amongst the living for closer to 48 hours? Maybe even more. I mean, at the rate we're seeing them, it doesn't really look like these people are coming in every single day, removing the dead animals from the living ones. And are they recording this? Is there anybody to make sure they're recording this? that's all up for your own thoughts. We're gonna go to page 31. So basically it's saying on page 31, managing sick or injured birds. So one of the requirements is sick or injured birds that exhibit obvious signs of pain must be promptly treated or euthanized. Birds that are severely lame must be treated, moved to a recovery pen, or euthanized. So again, cost effectiveness, time effectiveness, are they trying to make these birds better, or are they just euthanizing them? So a friend of mine has a broiler rescue from a local farm here. She is a hairdresser, and a farmer's daughter actually brought this baby broiler into her. So when she brought her, she was like, could fit in your palm, like the cutest little thing. But she could not walk properly. So she was asking my friend, who has a few other rescue chickens, hey, like, is there any way you can take her? Because otherwise we don't really know what to do with her. We're gonna have to euthanize her. So my friend took her, and within just a few days of practice and running around, she's just fine, running around like a normal chicken. I mean, now she is massive. She's way past the age that she would have normally been culled. So she's seeing some other issues, falling over often and all that, because their bodies are just designed to grow huge. I mean, we usually slaughter them for food at between 4 and 7 weeks of age. So she's well past that now. She's at least 14 weeks. So that bird, for example, they would have euthanized her, but all she really needed was a couple days to be able to grow and work her shit out. So it's kind of just sad. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about money and time. Are they going to take the care to care for those animals? Probably not. Page 33, we'll go on to. Okay. So, husbandry practices. We're going to go to requirements. Birds must be handled at all times in such a manner that minimizes stress or injury. Birds must not be carried solely by the head, neck, one wing, or tail feathers. Release chickens by setting them down on their feet or from low heights that enable them to land normally, feet first. Avoid releasing in such a way that requires flying. Carry heavy turkeys by both legs and one wing, and release gently on the floor on their breasts. I don't know if you've ever tried to like catch a bird, catch a chicken. I mean, some of them are used to being handled and they like it. They like to be picked up. Otherwise, they kind of run away from you. Of course, they're kind of like skittery. So not always like it's easy to say to pick them up a certain way, but yeah, it's not always done, as I can imagine. Later, we'll talk more about the chicken catching, when they catch them to load them up to bring to the slaughterhouse. And we'll go more into detail for that. We're going to go to page 35. First paragraph. So reproductive management for broiler breeders. So breeding broiler chickens, which are the chickens that we eat for food. Broiler breeders are bred naturally by keeping mixed pens of hens and roosters. The ratio of roosters to hens is important to ensure efficient reproduction and a stable social hierarchy. The appropriate portion of roosters in a group will vary with bird strain, but typically ranges between 6 to 10% roosters. Pens with too many roosters may show higher levels of aggression, and hens may be stressed by too many mating attempts. It is also important that hens and roosters be at compatible stages of maturity and body size. So I don't know if any of you have ever seen videos or pictures of broiler breeder barns, but they are so horrific. This is when I will say, like, if you have a little bit of a trigger warning with sexual things or being taken advantage of or having sex forced upon you, maybe skip this part. So these hens are forcibly and repeatedly mounted by these turkeys. By these roosters, sorry. They end up with deep gashes in their sides from the claws of them trying to mount them. Many of them suffocate from being mounted. It's just a horrible environment, as you can imagine, being in a barn with a bunch of being a female in a barn, trying to mind your own business, and having males repeatedly trying to get on top of you. And yes, obviously roosters are aggressive. It's just a very horrifying thing to see and to even hear about or read about. It's just so unnatural. And I mean, do we really, in order to eat chicken, I mean, there's other forms of protein. Are we putting these animals through this just so we can have some chicken? Like, just seems very ridiculous and unnecessary and unjust. So we're gonna move now to page 36. So I'm always talking about this around the holidays, a very festive thing to talk about, I know, but semen collection and artificial insemination. So due to their large size, turkey breeders are usually bred by artificial insemination. Hens in lay need to be handled gently at all times to protect their welfare and productivity. So it goes on to talk more about turkeys and what happens to turkeys during semen collection, but the only thing it says about the hens and the birds being artificially inseminated is hens in lay need to be handled gently at all times to protect their welfare and, of course, productivity. So, I mean, it's pretty messed up. There's no guidelines of how to handle hens, which is just crazy, or how to even artificially inseminate. So what, it's just a big free-for-all? That's disgusting. Let's move on to the tom turkey requirements, though. So tom turkeys and turkey hens, again, must be handled in such a way as to prevent injury and minimize stress throughout all aspects of semen collection and artificial insemination processes. So again, nothing about how to inseminate the turkey hens, nothing at all. And then the one thing it says about the tom turkeys: do not overstimulate toms during collection or injury may result. Rest for 3 to 4 days any toms that have shown cloacal bleeding during collection. So, I mean, turkeys don't have dicks, but I'm always talking about how we frickin' masturbate turkeys until their dicks bleed to collect semen to produce turkeys. So, says right there in the care and handling of turkeys, rest for 3 to 4 days any toms that have shown cloacal bleeding during collection. So don't jerk your turkey off too much. If he's bleeding, give him a few days rest. It's just insanity. Insane. After collection, release toms slowly and gently back onto the floor. Yeah, because that's what we're worried about here. When you put them back down after diddling them, be gentle. All right. Where are we going here next? So page 37, first 2 sentences. Okay. Managing harmful behavior. So feather pecking can be a problem in turkey flocks and breeder flocks, especially if it involves into cannibalism. The underlying cause of this behavior is poorly understood. However, there are several risk factors that may trigger outbreaks of feather pecking, especially if more than one contributing factor occurs at the same time. So, of course, there's a bunch of BS things you can do to stop your birds from cannibalizing on each other, because that's natural behavior. Moving birds from rearing accommodation, stocking density, feed restriction, blah, blah, blah. But we can all agree that the underlying cause of this behavior is from stuffing them all into tiny barns in completely unnatural situations where they have to fight over food, fight over anything, warmth, bedding, nesting. So the underlying cause of this behavior is poorly understood. The underlying cause. What could the underlying cause possibly be? I mean, you don't see birds eating each other and cannibalizing and feather pecking in the wild. I mean, I'm sure it happens sometimes, but not to the extent that you would have to write a manual about it. Okay, 38. Physical alterations. Sorry, guys. Okay, so 38, some more physical alterations. So capinizing is the procedure of removing the testicles of roosters to influence their growth and resulting meat quality. Because birds' testicles are internal, castration is a surgical procedure traditionally performed without anesthetic. It is therefore an invasive, painful process. This procedure is not typically performed in Canada. Not typically, you still can do it. So, I mean, if you're going to get better meat, better growth of your roosters, why wouldn't a farmer do it, in my opinion? Maybe it's never done, but it just says typically isn't performed in Canada. Oh yeah, so to prevent outbreaks of feather pecking, breeder chicks and poults are often beak treated. Beak treatment, how nice. In hatcheries and occasionally trimmed as adults if needed. There's less pain and fewer complications associated with initial beak treatments that are done early in life at the hatchery, even when re-trimming later in life is needed, as opposed to performing initial trimming on farm when birds are older. So do it when they're a baby no matter what. If you need to do it again when they're adults, it's less painful for them than if you just do the original treatment when they're an adult, for some reason. Initial beak trimming must not be performed on broiler breeders that are older than 10 days of age, unless required to control an outbreak of cannibalism. So do it when they're babies, that's fine. All right. Page 40. Okay, page 40 talks about transportation a little bit. I'll do another video on more in depth of transportation. As you can imagine, transportation is very stressful, can be very cold or very hot, generally just not great for animals, and the laws are complete BS. So it just says the second little paragraph sentence on page 40 for transportation. It is recognized that by its very nature, the transportation process, which includes catching, loading, transporting, and lairage, includes stress and risk of injury. So at least they're acknowledging, you know what, yep, it is stressful and there is risk of injury. But it's still humane, still must be done, still necessary in this day and age. 41. So as far as like loading up the birds to be transported to their final destination, feed is typically withdrawn from birds ahead of transport to ensure their digestive tracts are empty to reduce the risk of contamination of carcasses during slaughter. Withdrawal times are usually determined by the processor. However, total withdrawal time should not be so excessive as to negatively affect the bird welfare. So basically what they're saying, but in nicer words, is that they don't want shit all over your meat when they process, so starve them a little bit, no longer than 24 hours, but it says later in here somewhere up to 48 hours they wouldn't push it. But yeah, so when they slaughter the chickens and cut them open, they basically just don't want feces all over their food, all over your food. Yeah, very, very sad. Okay, 42. Okay. 42. So 42 is catching, loading, and unloading procedures. So careful handling of birds during catching, loading, and unloading will reduce fear and minimize injuries to birds. So minimize injuries. It's not possible to not injure them. As I was talking about before, trying to catch a bird, trying to catch a chicken, you're chasing them down. That's catching one chicken. So here they're catching hundreds, most of the time thousands of chickens. There's a slaughterhouse that we attend regularly for vigils. It's farm to table birds, local birds. They slaughter 50,000 chickens 5 nights a week. So just a few. Catching crews must be supervised by a competent individual. Birds must be handled in a manner that minimizes stress and or injury. Birds must not be carried solely by the head, neck, one wing, or tail feathers. The catching area must promote safe and humane handling and catching. Birds must be in an upright position after being loaded into containers. Parts of birds must not protrude from containers in any way that can cause injury or impede movement. So again, bringing it back to going to vigils and stopping slaughter trucks, seeing the birds inside. We've seen it all. I mean, these birds are mostly in shock. They've been roughly grabbed. There's no other way than to do it roughly. They can use all these words. They can recommend nice ways to do it, but there's no other way than to do it roughly and stressfully. It's just not possible at that number of birds. I mean, maybe if you're catching your 5 little birds and you're bringing them to a slaughterhouse for your family, I mean, that can be regulated more, right? So we've seen birds, they're mostly just completely in shock. They're sitting there like kind of blinking. Lots of them still have yellow on their necks from their little baby bird feathers. Otherwise they're white. We've seen the eye burns on them. We've seen them with completely white eyes. We've seen them, we saw one with her neck completely broken. She kept trying to lift her neck up, so they're grabbing them any way possible, by their feet, their necks, their heads. Anyways, if you speak with any chicken catcher, they'll literally say that you're grabbing them and you can just hear and feel their bones breaking in your hands because there's no way around it. So that brings me down to, we're still on page 42, and we're going to go down to recommended practices, letter I. Monitor worker fatigue as it can negatively affect bird welfare. So you can only imagine being that guy or those 2 guys running around and catching all these birds. Imagine catching 50,000 birds in a night to bring over to this processor. That's their minimum processing. So you have to have 50,000 birds if you're going to use this slaughterhouse. So they're catching 50,000 birds in one evening. They transport them at night. Of course, they don't want anybody to see them. The workers all have to come in at night. So bird welfare not aside, but as horrible as that is, and I mean, you want these workers not to be tired because you want them to do it in the nicest way possible. Imagine being that person. I mean, people are always saying how, oh, vegans, they only care about the animals. Like, what about humans? It's like, well, think about who's doing these jobs, who's catching all these birds, who's catching 50,000 birds in a night and shoving them into plastic crates and putting them on a car. It's like, and then the people at the slaughterhouse working, I mean, they're dependent on drugs and alcohol even to cope. It's just horrible. Like, nobody wants to do it. Nobody's like, oh, when I grow up, I want to work in a slaughterhouse. I don't know if you've ever had to kill an animal that you hit on the road or just kill an animal in general. It's devastating, and that's just one animal, and that can affect you inside. Imagine how many birds a night you're slitting their throats. 50,000 birds a night. How are you going to walk into that job and leave that job after one day as the same person as you were before? It's just not a thing. 47. I would definitely recommend like reading through all of these. I've learned so much reading through all of it. I'm kind of going over like the most obvious like bad parts, legal animal abuse, but just reading it all really gives you a new perspective on what exactly goes on in these farms. So page 47, mass depopulation. So depopulating an entire flock or group of birds may employ euthanasia techniques, but all methods used for mass depopulation meet the criteria for euthanasia. Despite this, the methods employed for depopulating large numbers of birds needs to be as humane as possible given the situation. So again, they're saying, yup, this is fucked up, but given the situation, we still need to do it as humane as possible. So mass depopulation, I mean, it could be an outbreak, it could be mites, it could be a sickness that goes through your whole flock or large number of birds. It says typically mass depopulation on farm is an infrequent practice. However, in some cases, large numbers of birds are required to be depopulated on farm in an emergency such as disease outbreak or natural disaster. But also when they do a mass cull is at the end of a year and a half, 2 years, when laying hens, for example. We don't really go over laying hens much in this, but they're no longer producing the same amount of eggs, so they actually starve them out a little bit to boost their egg production during the last few hours of their lives, and then they mass cull them, because what good is 10,000 hens laying you eggs if they're not really laying eggs anymore? You're paying to feed them, shelter them, keep them safe, and at the end of that time they are mass culled. Of course, there are farms that they say they don't mass cull. No, we let them live out their lives. It's like, well, so you're feeding and sheltering like thousands of birds or hundreds and hundreds of birds that you aren't getting anything from. Like, that doesn't really seem feasible, doesn't really seem economical. But in big farms, that is like openly what they do. We've got them on videotape before. We've gotten people not too far from here where I live in BC, where they have children doing it. So these kids are lifting these chickens up and their faces are horrified, and they're putting them into an electric bath which stuns them and then puts them into a large garbage disposal bin. So those would be used for dog food and things like that, if not just waste, period. Individuals who are involved in mass depopulation must be competent in the methods used. We've seen kids doing it. I mean, probably not very well regulated. Probably not the top of the list for our Minister of Agriculture, for example, Elena Popham. She goes around and tests out berries and fruits and gets turkeys, but are you going to these places where they're mass culling hens by the thousands? I don't think so. Okay, 53. So lastly, we're gonna head to a chart on methods of euthanasia to close this out. 53. Here we are. So there's a couple big ones. I'll kind of just skim over the main ones because there's quite a few. Okay. So anesthetic overdose, you can guess what that would mean. They probably rarely do that. It's administered under the direction of a licensed veterinarian only. So non-penetrating captive bolt or penetrating captive bolt, correct placement of the device on the head is critical. You need humane restraint methods, so you need 2 people holding the bird down or whatever. Chickens have like little heads. I can't imagine that would really be easy to do. So manual blunt force trauma. Humane restraint methods, example, 2 people restraining the bird is necessary. The impact must be of sufficient force and accurately placed in order to result in immediate insensibility and death in a single blow. Just sounds crazy. Like, that doesn't sound like something you should be talking about in a sort of like government pamphlet, like 1 blow, death in a single blow. Just like seems weird. Alternative methods should be considered due to the potential for incorrect application. Decapitation naturally is one for birds. Gas inhalation, so nitrogen. So often when they do mass calls, this isn't typically on the farm. They take it off of the farm to do this. Yeah. Just comments. Birds may experience convulsions before becoming insensible. Humane. I don't really think so. Birds may become sensible if gas concentration is not sufficiently high and if oxygen levels are not low enough. This may be difficult to achieve in an on-farm setting. So the bunch of different gas inhalation methods, so nitrogen, carbon dioxide, or carbon monoxide. Cervical dislocation, manual, crushing of the neck bones is unacceptable prior to loss of sensibility. One of the big ones I wanted to talk about here is maceration. So this is acceptable only with chicks and poults that are less than 72 hours old. So you've probably seen the videos, and this is exactly where that comes from, when they are in hatcheries and they pull up literally the chick and they're like, oh, male or female. Females are of course usable, and males cannot lay eggs, so they're thrown directly into a macerator, into a big fancy word for a grinder. So these chicks are ground alive, 72 hours of life or less. So, I mean, again, cruelty aside and like unjustness aside, how much of a waste of life is that? You're hatching all these animals, the energy that goes into this, and less than 72 hours old, you're just grinding them up and they're used for cat food or dog food or just waste. So, I mean, it just seems crazy. We don't need eggs. We actually thrive better without eggs. They're not ours to use. Interesting fact, chickens are actually like, they are dinosaurs, and they are like little dinosaurs, and you see them, and I always think of dinosaurs like when you're watching like The Land Before Time. The dinosaurs would always like steal the eggs and like rip the eggs apart, and that's exactly what these little chickens look like. Like if you leave their egg in with them, sometimes they need to kind of be shown. You can crack their egg a little bit, but they'll start cracking their own eggs, and they just love it. They go wild. They fling that shit everywhere. It's really cute. Hens put everything they have in their body, all the nutrients and everything, into that one egg, all their energy. So it's like they eat that back and they get it back. I mean, chickens are supposed to, they're like females, like we get our periods, they get their eggs, one or a couple eggs a month, but now we have genetically modified them to pump out like multiple eggs a day. So it's not good. So, I mean, you can read over all the methods of euthanasia, but that was kind of the main ones I read out there. And yeah, so again, that's NFAC, NFACC, National Farm Animal Care Council. So this is the poultry code, it says. So code of practice for the care and handling of hatching eggs, breeders, chickens, and turkeys. So what I just read you, in my opinion, are legal forms of animal abuse. They're things that you wouldn't want done to yourself. They're things that you wouldn't want done to your family. You wouldn't want them done to your friends. You wouldn't want them done to your pets. Heck no. So, I mean, why are we doing this to these animals? And that comes down to speciesism, comes down to culture, it comes down to habits, what we've been raised to believe is okay in our culture, why we use certain animals and not others, and why they use certain animals and not others in other places, and we would deem that cruel and unnecessary, but we do the same things or worse to different species in our country. So this is all Canada. I mean, I'm sure there's a similar code of practice and guide for the States and other places, but if you go to the NFAC website, they have them for every animal, so it's just really great to read up on. That way, if anybody ever kind of questions you on something or fights you on something, you have all this information readily available to you, and these people can go onto this credible website and see exactly what you're talking about. So thank you so much for watching. I hope to post more of these. I wish I could edit pictures and videos and links and stuff into these, but until I get a better computer or fix mine, I won't be able to actually edit videos. So thank you guys so much for watching and looking into what happens to these animals and giving a shit. It's really what we need at this point in time, and the animals need you. So please arm yourself with information, just soak it all up, and spread the word, okay? Thank you guys so much.